If you've tried to follow the headlines coming out of Israel lately, you know how confusing it is. One outlet says one thing, another says the exact opposite, and everyone online sounds so sure of themselves. It's easy to get swept up in the noise and lose sight of what's actually true.
So that's why today we're talking with Nicole Jansezian. She's a freelance journalist who's spent over 2 decades reporting from Jerusalem. She's worked with Joel Rosenberg and All Israel News. She served with CBN, but she brings a rare insider view of how media in Israel really works, what shapes the stories, and why misinformation spreads so fast.
We'll talk about how propaganda works on all sides, how to slow down before hitting share, and how to think biblically when truth and emotion collide in the headlines.
So if you've been struggling to know what to believe about what's happening in Israel and Gaza and the rest of the world, I think this conversation will be helpful for you to see it clearly and carefully.
This is the Jewish Road podcast. Let's jump in.
Shalom, Chavarim. Welcome to the Jewish Road podcast. My name is Matt Davis, and looky over there, who are you?
Hey, I'm Ron Davis, the other half of the Chaver.
We are the only father-son Messianic Jewish podcast that is taking place right now in the state of Kentucky.
In the state of Kentucky?
Yeah. Maybe even
maybe in the whole country.
In the whole country. That's probably true. And we have a very special guest with us, Nicole Jansezian, in Israel, by the way, packing her bags for yet another trip. But Nicole, thank you for joining us here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I have to say that is so cool that you are a father-son podcasting team. I know a mother-son podcasting team in Texas, but you guys definitely, that's a really cool setup.
All I know how to do is cast. He does the potting.
Awesome.
I don't know if anybody knows what that means, but that's okay.
I don't know what it means either.
Hey, well, Nicole,
Awesome.
We wanted to have you. You're a friend of a friend, and now you're a friend. And so we're going to just remove that middle piece there. But you have a very interesting story and background. And I think that the people who listen to this podcast, especially these days and especially now, will want to hear what it is that you do and what you have going on. But let's start with this. You are in Israel right now, but you didn't start there. Where did you start?
Mm-hmm. That's right. I started in New York, in Queens, New York. It's where I was born and raised, spent most of my life there.
And for some reason or another, you found yourself in Israel. What brought you there?
Yeah, well, it goes back to actually when I was in 5th grade. And I was in the library reading program, the New York Public Library System. And, you read a book, you report it to the librarian. And I read a book from my parents' shelves, not from the library. And it was called Appointment in Jerusalem. And it was about Lydia Prince, the first wife of Derek Prince, and just about how she was called from Denmark to Jerusalem. And, she didn't even know where it was. But she followed that call. And I guess after that, and my mother said after that, I said, I'm going to move to Jerusalem someday. So I said that in 5th grade, forgot about it, didn't know where Jerusalem was at the time. But when, fast forward later in life, I studied journalism, I became a reporter, and I figured, I was trying to find what is the fastest track to become a foreign correspondent or a war correspondent, and where could I go? And I decided Jerusalem was always going to be the place that makes news. So, and the typical route of a reporter to become a foreign correspondent can take really a long time. So I Googled reporter job Jerusalem, and the first thing that popped up was a Christian organization in Jerusalem looking for a reporter. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. I don't know of this organization, but I'm going to apply. And I did. And within 2 months, I moved, and it was a one-way ticket. And I've been here for 24 years.
Wow.
24 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So found a husband there, started a family there, and all the things.
Yeah, didn't know I was going to stay. I mean, knew that this was something I had to do. I had to try, and but I met a guy, and that's it. All of our kids have been born here, and we haven't moved. We've traveled, but we haven't moved.
Yeah. So you're in Israel, and that, I mean, as far as job stability, having a place to be able to report on the news, there's always going to be something there in the epicenter of the world. And so we'll talk about what that's been like lately. But you've been able to report on a whole bunch of stuff. My curiosity is, we know as Americans that we have a very divided nation. We have the left, we have the right. There's some fringes all over the place in the middle and on outside of those. But what is it like in Israel? Politically and even with the news, right? We have our Fox News and we have our CNN, and we have the gamut that runs all around that. But how similar or how different is it in Israel?
Well, that's a great question. And I have to say, I'm still a student of the Israeli media. And, first it took learning Hebrew, and which took years. And I'm still not 100%, I can understand it, but, and then it took learning Israeli, which is another language altogether. I have seen that there are divisions. There is media that is more liberal. There's media that's more conservative, but you also can't compare. You can't say left, right like you do in America. Like, I think left, right in America is very straightforward in terms of, there's all of the most of the social and economic right-wing philosophies are all together. And then the left-wing, philosophies on everything, on social, on economics, all of that goes together. But in Israel, it's not like that. You have the different religious parties that you would think would be right wing, because in America we associate religious with being right wing or conservative, but they end up being the more welfare state. They're not working. They're getting paid to study in yeshivas. So they have that social left wing. Now, also when it comes to security, you also have the ultra orthodox that don't serve in the army. But then you have of the other religious parties, they serve in the army, and so you have so many divisions, and all of that in society is also reflected in the media. So in the media right now, I would say a vast majority of the media is anti the current government with Netanyahu at the head. It's not only because of Netanyahu, the prime minister, but it's also because of his coalition. And his coalition is comprised of some ultra-Orthodox parties and national religious parties and very quote unquote right wing elements. But again, it's not fully right wing like in America. And then there's the opposition. And in the opposition, there are a couple of parties that are extremely right-wing when it comes to security, but they are opposed to Netanyahu's government. And, it's so complicated. It makes, looking back at, my time in America and the very, very clear two-party system, it just makes it so much easier to understand America. And here, every time you have an election, I think one of the recent elections, we had 40 different parties to vote for. And so all of that is reflected in the media. You've got the channels 11, 12, and 13, which would be more like left-leaning, liberal, secular. And then you've got channel 14, which is rising up like the Fox News, which is, or maybe even more right-wing than Fox these days. But, and so you do see that reflected in the media, but it's layer upon layer with the politics.
Yeah.
Well, what you're talking about is a reflection of how everybody's opinions and everybody's stances and positions is just ballooning out all over the place. And, I think we have like 4 parties in America now. You got the right and the left, and you got the far right and the far left. And everybody's doing combat. You don't have any middle of the line where people, would argue on the floor of Congress and then go out and have lunch together.
Right.
And
right.
How is that? How is that working out? I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that they want Netanyahu out. Where I don't know, I see Netanyahu as somebody who has vowed to protect Israel against all of the enemies until they are set aside and wiped out and not a threat to Israel. And if they're not a threat to Israel, then that's good for the entire world.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe we could even just call the entire name of this podcast episode is It's Complicated, right?
Yeah. Entirely. I love it. Yes, because that exactly what you're saying is more of the international perspective of what's happening in Israel than it is the internal perspective. I don't know percentages, but there are many Israelis, a large portion of Israelis who blamed the Netanyahu government for the failures that led to October 7th and then the war. During the war, now I'm not giving my opinion on this. I'm just telling you what people were feeling during the war, that Netanyahu, how he was engaging in this war was in order to continue the war, to not have to face the consequences, to now to also open up a way for Israel to take over the Gaza Strip. I mean, there were a lot of accusations against his government. Now, again, there are many opposition parties that are also very clearly for the security of Israel. And that's a majority. Like in the Knesset, there's 120 members. And I think in one or two governments ago, and I think it's even more so now, you could only say that about 30 of the members are left wing, and some of them are Arab Israeli members of Knesset, and then there's other left wingers that are they're definitely opposed to all of Netanyahu's politics, but Israeli society, I would say, is very divided. Many people were not happy with the negotiations to end the war, the ceasefire, just with the internal politics and looking at the day to day. It was different from the overall picture of security that it is, may be projected overseas. But yeah, complicated, as you said, Matt. It's a very touchy issue, with the hostages, with the hostages' families led weekly protests in Israel, drawing tens of thousands of people, sometimes 200,000, 400,000, just to say there were two statements. There was let them go, which was a message to Hamas and to the world to say, get our people out. And then there was a message to the Israeli government, which was bring them home. And that was more an onus on the government itself. Like, you're the ones not doing your work. And that was a very loud and repeated charge against the government here for the past 2 years, that you're not doing enough to bring home our kids or our fathers or, our mothers, bring them home. So it got very complicated and divisive here during this time. So, I mean, that being said, we could say that Netanyahu will probably win the next election. When I say win the next election, even if he doesn't get a majority, he's really the only one who could probably build a coalition these days. There is no one that could challenge him, maybe in that sense. So it looks like in any case, he will probably be around if we do go to elections, as they say, should happen in the next couple of months.
It's interesting. It's interesting to talk to you as a journalist, because I know personally, I'm sure you have opinions on things, but as a journalist, you have to put your opinions to the side and you just have to the facts, right? Like, here's what happened. But it's very interesting also because, and really how we're couching this kind of whole topic is when you look at the headlines and the propaganda of what's happening in the Middle East. How do we read the news about Israel and have discernment and know what the truth is? Because you can have two people looking at the same situation and see it very, very differently. You can have cameras there and see something very, very, I mean, we had, in New York, you have a guy who walks up behind a medical executive and shoots him point blank. And all of a sudden he's the star of, a whole group of people because he's fighting for the man. And I even think like the Gospels, you have 4 Gospels who are all reporting on things that happened during the life of Jesus, life of Yeshua, and they're all coming up with their own perspective, their own take. And then I look at like, there's stuff that happens in my own household. And I'm like, how did you see that situation like that? So what are some of those rules? Like, how do you operate in the media, and especially in Israel, where it's heated, it's life or death, it's existential, it's survival, and there's an enemy that wants to take the nation out?
Yeah, that is just such a good question. It's such an important topic today because you saw what happened in the last 2 years, and it further divided the pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian crowds and protests. But I think it's so important when we're talking about news. There's a few things that I want to say about what you said. So first of all, like let's go back to the days 10 years ago, 20 years ago, before the proliferation of social media, when you got your news from fewer sources. Like, okay, cable news came up and then you had more sources. But back in the day, you had a couple of newspapers and they were static. When it was printed, it was printed. That's why the printed word is so important, because there it is. It's done. You're not revising it every 2 seconds, hitting refresh on a website. Also, you have the 3 networks. You had ABC, NBC, CBS, and then cable came around and stuff. So, but we know, like we knew as Americans, we know that there's some media that's liberal and there's some media that's conservative. And so when you're getting your news, you have in the back of your mind, you know where they're coming from. So you can say like, okay, well, this is the New York Times. We know that they're liberal, so I know that I'm getting a liberal perspective, but I could say to myself, as this trusted news source, or is this traditional news source, they probably are doing their due diligence in getting the story. So I think what we're seeing today is a real challenge to this traditional media because now anybody can get the story, anybody can report it, and anybody can do it at any second of the day. You could be the first. You may not be right. You may just, but you could just put it up there and then people will turn to you for news. So here's where things have gotten tricky lately, in my opinion, is with media. People who have studied journalism, we learned a few things about how to report a story. We learned how to source things. We were held to, certain ethics of getting quotes, spelling names right, and verifying a story as much as possible. And even before the internet, actually, maybe it was better that way. But these days, you can still count on most of the traditional media to be checking those basic boxes. Now, you're still getting opinion. You're still getting their opinion or their filter. They're filtering the news through their worldview. So you are getting that. So you still have to know that when you pick up a traditional media source, whether it's BBC or CNN or a newspaper or whatever, you need to know that. But now what's happening today is this shift into a new kind of journalism where it's influencer driven. I'm popular on a platform because I am giving out news, not me. I'm not talking about me because I'm not popular on a platform, but people who they are giving out the news. Now, they may have no training. They got popular because they went viral with some bit of information, but they don't know how to source. They don't know what's ethical. And what's happened these days, it's more people want to be first at the expense of being right. And it is so important to be right rather than be first. I would say you have to wait and verify. So you saw it happening, of course, in Israel, in Gaza, when back, I think it was in October 2023, when a rocket hit a hospital in Gaza, and immediately, all the sorts of what Israel bombed a hospital, and that went out, and that was it. And for most people who read that headline, there was no turning back. And they never came to the truth, to the investigation that was done, that even, Palestinian videos showed that the rocket was a failed attempt, I think, by Islamic Jihad. And it landed, instead of going to Israel, it landed in the hospital compound and killed people. Also, immediately the news came out, Israel bombed a hospital, 500 were killed. Who counted? Who counted? So there's a little bit of common sense in this as well. When headlines come out really fast, and on the internet, it's so important for us to all take a step back now and evaluate and check it out and wait for the news. Whenever there's breaking news, like here in Israel, we go through it on a regular basis. You get the first headline, a shooting incident at the city center, and you're like, okay, I got to stay alert. Is it criminal? Is it terrorism? Is it confirmed, actually, even? And so all of this will start playing out. And the people who I see it happen with the people who aren't reporters, but now they're influencers, and they're just putting out their one sentence with no context. Terror attack in Jerusalem. I'm like, wait a second. Or when sirens would go off and they would say missiles from Hezbollah. And it was just a siren. We don't know yet if it's a missile. Sirens don't always equal missiles. So there's just so many things that you have to catch yourself on. And unfortunately, I only see it getting worse, and only see it going more in that direction of adherence to speed rather than accuracy, because you see everybody's on their phone. The next generation, they're on their phones, and they need to get the information right away. So I only see it getting worse, if I could be very skeptical about it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I was hearing from you is my mind was going in that same direction of a whole generation that is impacted, or maybe we should say affected by, the social media and all of the fast response. And I don't see, maybe I'm wrong, you can say, but I don't see a lot of news analysis that's going on, behind the scenes things. What is taking place? What's taking place with the Abraham Accords? What's taking place with, all of the peace? What's the philosophy behind it? Where's the analysis to all of that?
Ron, that's such a good point. And actually, that is going to be the biggest loss, because people they're ready for the headline, and they're ready for the news, and they inform themselves based on what they quickly read. And ultimately, why is it important to know? For instance, I report a lot about the geopolitics, and that's so important. It's Israel doesn't want Turkish troops on the ground in Gaza. Okay, there's the headline, and you get your news and you hear that, and you can make a million conclusions, but you got to analyze why. Why would Israel not want that? Why does Turkey want that? These things it's so important. And of course, you could talk about, I don't want to get off the topic of the media and Israel and stuff like that, but I mean, critical thinking is all, part of that.
Yeah.
And that also seems to be a lost art and that's a big element of what we're seeing play out, I think.
Yeah, I think you have to get off of it and talk about critical thinking and analysis and all that, because what is behind the scenes, I think, in all of this is an understanding of the Middle East and what it all is. And we've got peace going now, sort of, in quotes, but it's driven a lot by economics. And that's
Yes.
This present administration is driven by economics and all of that. But what the massive issue is that needs to really be realized is that everything in the Middle East is driven by ideology. So, what would your thoughts be on that in connection to what we see and what's happening and what's being reported?
Yeah, it's so important. When I have even friends of mine who'll tell me, I get my news from so and so, and they name a source that is, that has a Telegram channel or that puts something on Twitter or Instagram or something, and I'm like, oh, you're not getting news. You're getting headlines and opinion with zero context. You're not finding out why that's important. Like, for instance, last week, the biggest non-headline of the year, maybe, that they're going to announce another country joins the Abraham Accords. And did you hear? It was Kazakhstan.
Indonesia you're talking about?
Yeah, it was like, it was Kazakhstan. Yeah, because Indonesia, I was like, okay, it's going to be Saudi Arabia or Indonesia. And it was Kazakhstan. And it's like you said, I think, this is going to raise some eyebrows of, what you were just saying, of that it's become not a peace agreement necessarily. They already have relations with Israel. It's become an economic thing and everybody wants to get in on the economics. But actually, wait, what was your question? Because I'm just laughing about Kazakhstan right now.
Yeah, the fact that the thing that is the driving force that it seems to be a blind spot is the ideology in the Middle East, not the economics.
Right. So that is it's extremely true. And it's the more I even just, well, again, it's complicated. I like to, I feel like I'm using that as an excuse, but it's extremely rooted here. And I would say not even just the religious ideologies. Something I've learned living here for a couple years is that there's something that we don't get in the West, and it's the issue of land. And land is part of the culture, the ethos, the tradition of a lot of people groups. The Palestinians. It's about land. A lot of people say, well, why don't they just go to Jordan? Why don't they just, they're getting these European countries are evacuating them. Go to Europe. Europe sounds amazing. They have an affinity with the land. And it's the land itself that they don't want to leave. It's not necessarily a state and not necessarily a government or a people group. It's the land. So that to even add to the ideologies that are driving, because then if you just there are ideologies also among the Israeli Jews. Some are more secular based and some are more religious. Some are more, when I say messianic, I don't mean messianic, they believe in Yeshua, but messianic, they're like building a temple for the Messiah. So there are all of those ideologies, but among the Palestinians, you have, political ideologies. You have religiously driven ideologies, which like Hamas is a religious political group that is built on an ideology, on a charter, which wants to do specific things. But then you have Palestinians who it's not their party. It's not their belief. It's not their ideology. So there are many, many elements that go into this region, and many different religions and minority groups as well. That, if you look at Syria has so many different minority groups. I look at Syria, I always thought of it as it's a Muslim nation. Majority it is, yes, but there's minorities among the Muslims. There's the Alawites. There's the Druze. They don't, not even Muslim necessarily, an offshoot of Islam. But there's Christians. There are Shia Muslims. There are Hezbollah, pro Hezbollah Muslims. There's pro Iranian Muslims. There's Sunni. So there's so many conflicting ideologies as well. So it's complicated. What a cop-out. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, considering all of these, the chaos of all of these different ideologies, how in the world are you going to diplomatically come to any solutions without realizing what you're really up against? Not economics, but this ideology, which it almost seems unsolvable.
That's a political question, and she's just reporting on it. I don't know if you might have your own opinions on that, but you don't necessarily.
Well, what you're seeing there, and the thought.
Yeah. I mean, I see, how about this? Because I know what you're saying. And I see like America come in, and I see Trump, who's a, very strong personality and he wants to insert his influence. And, where I don't necessarily understand, where he's making a deal, then you're like, oh, good, wow, he's bringing peace. But here, just like, for instance, that first video that came out, maybe it was over a year ago, about the Gaza Riviera. There was an AI generated video that I think even he posted on his own social accounts of him and Netanyahu sipping cocktails in Gaza. That doesn't fly here for any of the people, not for the Israelis, not for the Palestinians. So there has to be more understandanding, I would say, in a lot of these issues. I know another a deal that he brokered. I'm going tomorrow to Armenia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Most people in America have no idea about that conflict. And Armenians have strong opinions about that, and Azeris too, I'm sure. So yeah, there's a sensitivity. There needs to be a sensitivity to the issues on the ground. And I think that comes after living and understanding what is going on. And I'll tell you what, the more you live here, the more you realize you don't understand. So maybe what I'm saying is actually impossible in terms of coming to a solution. But I would say that being here and seeing how the people interact, for the most part, there could be peace here. If you let the normal people, the regular people, just send their kids to school and work a job and sit at the same cafe, you wouldn't believe how integrated Israeli society is. Wherever you go down the street, people are getting along. So it's not as black and white as people make it out to be in terms of a conflict.
I'm curious, we use this word propaganda, and propaganda was part of World War II and Nazi Germany. That was the first time I remember even this word showing up in my life. But there's a propaganda machine, and it's not just like the Western left and right and everything in between. But then you have something like an Al Jazeera, or there is money behind a message and from our perspective as Jews, that is very anti-Semitic. And how do we, and I've seen even accusations of people saying, well, Israel is paying people, they're paying influencers money to be able to report good things about Israel. And even my kids, my teenagers, they're asking like, well, hey, Dad, what about this? They're paying off Israeli influencers or pro-Israel influencers so that they can get this message out. And I know a couple guys who are there, part of the Israeli government, who, like, rather than putting them on the battlefront and the battle lines, they put them on really more of the information war. How does all of that work? Because for me, I don't have an issue if Israel is paying for good publicity. Israel needs good publicity, though that feels like a losing battle no matter what. Like, we're going to do better on the actual battlefront than the information war.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And for sure, governments are going to do what governments are going to do. It's not, Israel may or may not be paying people, but in any case, even the voices that are pro-Israel that are out there, I don't know if they're all getting paid. There's a few you could name, the big names. Maybe they're getting paid, maybe they're not. Maybe they're doing it because it's their opinion. So that's one thing. Qatar is most likely doing it. Also around America, the Qatari money on campuses. Azerbaijan has been also accused of doing it with its own agenda. So governments do this. Now, here's where we need to be careful. And I know you were going a different direction with this, and I don't mind also talking more about like the messaging. But where we have to be careful is that these messages that we're hearing from governments are one-sided and they lack lack context. Now, it's simple to hear it's for me, sorry, not these days, but it's simple for me to hear something anti-Semitic and say, well, this is bad. This is wrong. This is, this needs to be countered. Okay. That's one thing. But a lot of times what we're getting is not necessarily, blatantly evil. It's a soft influence that is coming through. And that is actually something we need to be more wary of. And all governments are doing it. All governments are doing it. And the opposition to the governments are also most likely doing it. So when, for instance, you get, Al Jazeera will come out with something, and then the Israeli Prime Minister's office or the IDF will put out a statement, and both are Al Jazeera is a news network, but they do report they're a lot for Hamas, but it's like you've got two conflicting things. Now, propaganda is really the enemy of truth on so many levels, because just because your propaganda is, let's say, maybe right or acceptable, it degrades the truth to present it in a propaganda, in a one-sided style. Like as a journalist, I mean, as an influencer or as an opinion maker who's out there, okay, that's your prerogative to bring that to the table. But as a news outlet or as somebody who's trying to report the truth, it is your duty to unpack, even if it's the side you agree with, their statement and their propaganda, and credit it to them. Don't say Israel did not bomb the hospital, or the Israeli investigation found that it was an errant missile. You add the IDF said. It's they said it. This is not you promoting a message that you can't prove. Just because you want to believe it. Listen, there was so much going on in Gaza, and it was so hard to find out. I have a few sources that are connected to Gaza, and the best I could do was talk to them. And you know what? There were people hungry. There were Christians that were shot by an Israeli sniper. These are things that are true, and it doesn't make Israel worse for saying the truth, and it's both should be said, and both should be allowed. The truth should be able to come out, all of it. And with all of these influences that these governments are promoting, it is our duty. Like, you could tell your kids, like, yeah, you saw this, you read this, but dig a little further, find out about it. Like, who said what, what's the source of this information? Is it a known biased source? And what did Israel say about it? How did they combat it? Go then check out the Israeli source. Is it, there was a spokesman that everybody loved here. If he said it, we believed it because he was such a good man. He felt like such a good man when he spoke, Mm-hmm. But then when somebody in the government said it, everybody was like, oh, no way, not if he's saying it. So you really have to, and you have to get past that too. But, look at the source and always dig a little bit deeper instead of taking things at face value. Because propaganda is really it's tainting the news right now. I think it's destroying any sense of objectivity and for us to be able to find the truth.
Yeah. Hey, we're going to be coming out to Israel in March with a group of folks. Would love to be able to just sit with you in the city, in the place, yes, and to have more conversations. So, I know that you had to do a lot of running around to make this time possible. I know your family's headed out of country even tomorrow morning. And so thank you for the time. I feel like this is a part one, and we'll have to have many more parts after this. But thank you for doing what you're doing and representing with truth and getting that story out. If people want to follow you, I know you have some online presence. Where do people go to find you? And we'll put all the links, obviously, in our show notes too.
Well, thank you very much. And also thank you. It was great talking to you guys. And I really believe it's such an important topic. So I'm more than happy to share my thoughts. People could find me on my website, Nick Jan. It's because my name is so hard to pronounce. I just have the first three letters, Nick for NIC and JAN for my last name. And on YouTube, I do lives as there's news coming out and, just what's being said here. And sometimes I'm doing it walking around the old city. So looks great. Right? It's really
Even
cool.
better.
Yeah.
Even better.
Yeah.
Well, Nick Jan, thank you for being here on the Jewish Road podcast. My dad and I loved the conversation and more to come.
Yeah, great. Next time.
Hey.
All right.
Can't wait to meet you guys in person.
Yep. All right. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.